Hello and welcome to Prophecy in the News. I'm Gary Stearman, and today we're going to talk about UFOs, specifically the question, and it's expressed right here on the cover of the August 2011 Prophecy in the News magazine. What does the Bible say about UFOs? Well, today's discussion is going to be very interesting, very biblical, and very informative. And with me in studio today is Bob Ulrich. Hi, Bob.
Gary, how are you today?
I'm great. We just got back from a wonderful conference in Branson, Missouri, as we make this program today.
That is an understatement. We got back from a fantastic conference of speakers that were just unrivaled. In fact, I asked Tom Horn, who put on the conference, how he managed to get so many good speakers in one place at one time on such short notice. And he smiled and said nothing. He just smiled, as Tom likes to do.
Yeah.
So I think the Lord intervened to bring people together at just the right time for a conference that I think was just far more than a prophecy conference, wasn't it?
Indeed it was. There was a real spirit present, a kind of an awareness. People were hungering for information, and they went home with lots of it, believe me.
Well, let's get to the crux of this program today, Gary. And Gary's going to do an awful lot of talking on the program today, which is good because he has a story to tell. And that is probably a great understatement. In fact, Gary gave a message at Tom's Prophecy Conference. And I've got to tell you, it was standing room only. And you could have heard a pin drop when he started to speak. Because Gary told a story that he has kind of kept to himself, kept under his hat, for 40 years. And it's a story that you're going to want to hear today. So don't change that dial, because you're going to hear a story about an experience Gary had in an airplane 40 years ago. And you have to understand, this has shaped his perspective on UFOs, because they're not unidentified in Gary's mind. They are fully identified. And he's going to tell us a story today, something he hasn't shared but to a handful of people in the last 40 years. That's going to knock your socks off. So I know you're going to want to hear what he has to say. He's got the floor.
After that huge buildup, right here on page 3 of the magazine I just showed you is the story I've never told. And that's literally true. For the first time, I'm telling a story that played a very important role in the way I look at the Bible, the way I look at spiritual matters. And Bob, we should go back to my early life. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and started studying that in college when I discovered in college that really I was much more interested in writing. And I became a writer. I graduated with degrees in advertising writing and expository writing, and went to work in the aircraft industry as a writer. I was developing point-of-sale materials, owner's manuals, you name it. There's a lot of publication in the aircraft business. First for Beech Aircraft in Wichita, Kansas, and then later I went to Cessna Aircraft, and there I was involved in point-of-sale materials. That is, developing everything from motion pictures to brochures and pamphlets, anything a salesman would need to make a sale. We generated it at the factory, and then we would take these materials out to the field, give them to salesmen for the salesman to use. So that's where the story starts, Bob.
Well, you have kind of a famous last name, don't you?
My name is Stearman, and of course I came from an aviation family. Learned to fly when I was 16. Had my license since then, been flying all these years, even to this present day. And I was flying for Cessna. Now, it was a summer day to begin this story. On a Saturday, we had loaded a Cessna 207 with about a ton of materials to go to 2 different aircraft dealerships. These materials were point-of-sale materials. They were sales training materials that we had developed, and our custom at Cessna was to fly them out to the field so that people could use them. And we loaded on a Saturday. I took off on a Sunday morning from Wichita to fly to Dallas Love Field, and took about 2 hours. Uneventful flight, beautiful day, and I dropped off about half those materials at Dallas Love before taking off just a little bit after noon for Lubbock, Texas, to deliver the rest of the materials to our Cessna dealership in Lubbock. And Bob, that's where the story starts, because climbing out of Love Field and heading west for Lubbock, climbed to about 6,500 feet. Everything was wonderful. Had a good, beautiful day, and I always enjoyed flying. And when I'm in the air, I'm happy. And I was happy until, boom, out of nowhere, I got an electrical warning. Light flashes, all the gauges drop, and I checked everything out and discovered I had no electrical power, except what was reserved in the battery. And Bob, that's when you sit up straight and start
Well, that would terrify me, but I've talked to you about it, and you really didn't seem that concerned.
No, I wasn't, because I figured, well, I can turn off the electrical system, save my power until I get to Lubbock, turn it back on again. I'll have enough power to lower the flaps and to call the tower, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I did. I conserved electrical power, turned all the radios off, all the electrical system. The engine has its own electrical system, so it keeps right on running. And I'm flying along at 6,500 feet, and now I'm relaxed again. Everything's fine. I'm sure I'll make it to Lubbock. And Bob, that is when it happened.
Well, you've described the feeling of being up in the air to me before. I've never flown in a small plane, but it must be a different experience just being up in the clouds all by yourself with the sound of the motor humming.
It's terrific. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. I mean, it's almost like driving through the mountains when you're up in the clouds. And the air is cool. It's very relaxing. I'm flying along, looking straight ahead, and all of a sudden I heard a voice. And the voice said, and I'm going to try to imitate what it sounded like. The voice said, "If you look to your left, you will see a UFO." And that's exactly what it sounded like. And I'm sitting here, and my first reaction was, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
Sounds like a tour bus operator in Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely. And my first reaction was, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. My second reaction was, I'm not going to look to my left.
You're kidding me, right?
I'm not kidding. And I didn't. I looked straight ahead and flew along for a while, and I'm not sure, a minute or so. And again, this same voice, same tone. If you look to your left, you'll see a UFO. And I laughed out loud. I mean, it was just hilarious.
Now, Gary, if this came from anyone else but you, I would laugh and snicker and make fun of it. But you're the most sane, credible, balanced human being that I've ever known. And so when you say it, and I know you had great fear of exposing what actually happened to you that you're about to hear, but I said to him clearly, Gary, if it really happened, you've got to tell people about this. It's important.
Well, Bob, for reasons which will become apparent later, I kept this story to myself, telling only 4, 5, 6 people over the years, the last 40 years, because I didn't want to be thought a nut. So the second time the voice sounds, and I laughed out loud, and then it hit me. Wait a minute, my radios are turned off. I have no electrical power. Where's that voice coming from? Because it sounded like it came over the radio speakers, but it couldn't have because the power was off. And it was then that I looked to my left, and I looked very cautiously around, and about a mile to my left, just a little below my altitude, was a bright point of light, very, very like a little star. Looked like it was maybe a mile away, and it was flying my speed and direction right along beside me. And I thought, must be another airplane. In fact, they used T-41s at Lubbock back in those days, and they had polished aluminum wings. They were the primary trainers for Air Force pilots, and so I looked at it, and I thought that's got to be the polished aluminum wings of a T-41, and so I dismissed it. But I did notice that he was going in the same direction that I was, and as we flew, we got closer and closer and closer together, and I reasoned that, well, we're both headed for the same place, and as you get closer to that place, you'll gradually come together at a point of convergence. And so I dismissed it as a T-41, Bob, until we flew under an overhead cloud bank and it got dark.
Now, we do need to add at this point that you're not a Christian at this point in your life.
No. At this point in time, I was not a believer at all. In fact, I was kind of skeptical. A lot of people had talked to me about Christianity from the time I was a little kid, and I had seen enough of Christianity and the people who represented it to be a little suspicious of it. So although I, at a certain point, was curious about Christianity, I was definitely not a Christian.
And of course, the second thing you need to add is that you had quite a background in studying and the curiosity about UFOs. So this was not something to you that came as that much of a surprise. So here you come into a cloud, you come out of the cover of darkness, and what did you see?
Well, we both flew under a dark cloud, and he continued to be as bright as he was when we were out in the sun. And I thought, wow, that is a UFO after all. And the instant I had that thought, this thing came right over next to me. It covered about a mile in 2 seconds. It went swoosh right over next to me, and it was flying along in formation with me about 100 feet off my left wing. It was a circular, beautiful, shiny, aluminum-looking thing, about 100 feet in diameter, about 15 feet thick, and it was practically within touching distance, and it flew along beside me. And Bob, here's the interesting thing. As we flew together, I felt that I was being probed, if you will. I can't think of a better term. I could feel something like beams of energy coming through me, and it suddenly hit me. This thing has the ability to read my thoughts, and it is doing that.
Now, you described it as an upside-down Reese's peanut butter cup.
Right.
So traditional, flying saucer.
And as a matter of fact, in the August 2011 Prophecy in the News, artist Daniel Wright has put an artist's conception of what this looked like.
Huge. It's huge.
It is huge. That's the size it was. And if you want to see what I saw, you have to check the Prophecy in the News magazine, but it did look a little like an upside-down peanut butter cup, and it flew right along beside me, and it was very busily, I thought, probing or scanning me. But Bob, it was exhilarating. I was not at all afraid. I was quite the opposite. I was thrilled to be able to look at this machine, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life.
Now, when I heard you say that, the first thought that went through my mind is, okay, you're up in the air. You've got an electrical problem.
Yeah.
You're worrying whether you're even going to be able to put your landing gear down to be able to land the plane, and that may not scare you. I know you've had some situations in the air, but to me, not being able to put the landing gear down is right out of the movies. So you've got this craft next to you. You've got some type of sound wave or something that must have felt good, where you almost felt like you were being protected.
I did. I had the feeling this thing had come alongside me to help me, not to harm me. I don't know how to describe it except as a feeling. And we flew along together for, I don't know, it could have been 10 or 15 minutes. And I was very thrilled that this was all happening. It's just one of the most amazing things. And I decided after a bit that I would edge closer toward it because I wanted to get close enough to see what it was made out of, see if it had rivets or joints or whatever. So I edged my aircraft over toward this thing ever so slightly, and I got the feeling as I got very close, I was down to like 60, 50, 40, 30 feet away from it, and looking right at it, and I got a sense from it that it didn't want me to come near. Stay away. And at that very moment, it banked, and within 2 seconds, it was a mile away again. And when it banked the wrong way. It turned upside down and flitted away. And once again, it was matching my speed and direction about a mile away, and it looked like a little star over there. So there you go.
I don't know what to say. I've heard the story before, as had JR and a handful of people, and we've tried to get you to go public with this for years, and you weren't ready. Well, you're going to tell us why you weren't ready.
Well, I wasn't ready, A, because I don't want to be a laughingstock, and B, because I wasn't sure what the application was. But now, Bob, after all these years, and with times being what they are, looking back on this event, it led to the way I view the Bible. It led to me being clearly understanding in the sense that there are real vehicles flying through a real sky, and that they are tough enough, hard enough that you can reach out and hit them with your knuckles if you want to. I mean, we're talking about a real machine here, And knowing that a real machine could come out of nowhere and materialize beside you and go through all the machinations that this thing did changed the way I think about the world.
Why should that surprise us, Gary? It's throughout the pages of the Bible.
It is.
If you haven't seen Gary's new book, and this is definitely not a pitch, this story today, to sell his new book, because the story is not in this book. It's actually in the August issue of the magazine. But Gary's written a book, Time Travelers of the Bible. It's 539 pages. It's 28 chapters. It took me about 4 days, honestly, to work my way through it and really come to understand it. But we go into the stories in the Bible where they're craft. They're celestial craft. They're the throne of the Lord on wheels came down to meet Ezekiel. And there are literally dozens of stories about the Hebrew prophets and how they saw the future in Time Travelers of the Bible. We're selling these as fast as we can get them printed. I'm sure the story is going to make the book even more interesting because you're going to understand the Hebrew prophets did travel into the future to see the future.
Now, Bob, let's complete this story. Speaking of time, I came to realize in this encounter that time was somewhat malleable, because after this machine flitted away from me and flew along beside me, I looked forward, and right off my nose was Lubbock, Texas. And I thought, we can't be here already. Not enough time has elapsed.
When did you leave Love Field?
I left Love Field about a little after noon.
And how long was the flight?
Well, after I landed, I discovered I'd been in flight for over 6 hours, probably 6.5 hours, and I only had a little over 4 hours of fuel on board.
How long should the flight have been from Love Field to Lubbock?
It should have been 2 hours.
And so you were in the air for 6 hours.
Should have been an hour and 45 minutes. I was in the air for 6 hours, and yet it seemed to me as though maybe 15 minutes had passed.
And you lost over 4 hours of time, basically.
I lost over 4 hours of time, and to me, it was just as though, in the end, time had been speeded up. So here I look over the nose, there's Lubbock, Texas.
And this is where the story gets interesting.
I turned the battery back on again, and lo and behold, I had enough power to do everything I needed to land. I landed, headed toward the Cessna dealership, and Bob, it was evening time. The sun was in the west. I had taken off at noon, and I had no consciousness of this whatsoever. As I shut the airplane down, I looked through the windshield back toward the east, and there was that sparkling thing still in the sky watching me. I could tell it was watching me. I got out of the airplane, I went into the dealership, and the dealer was mad because I was supposed to have been there about 2 o'clock. He'd been waiting all Sunday afternoon for me to come with his supplies, and he was furious. And I muttered something about having seen a UFO, and he said, I don't want to hear about UFO. I don't believe in UFOs. Don't say the word UFO to me again. And I said, okay, I will not. And I didn't.
You never talked about it again?
Never talked about it again, because I didn't want to be thought to be a kook. But here I was, having experienced something very real, having flown 6 hours and used 2 hours worth of fuel, having lost the sense of time, feeling like I had been in the air maybe 30 minutes at the most, when I was really in the air for 6.5 hours. This sort of a thing will affect the way you think down the line, and it has, because later, and it wasn't very much later than that, I became a Christian, and I voraciously began to consume the Bible. And when I did, it was with the view that there were events in this world far, far beyond man's ordinary perspective.
Well, now we understand why Gary writes about the things he writes about and why he's got such a fascination with this. And in real life, this type of passion drives people to accomplish certain things. So you had an encounter. Okay, you got your landing gear down. You landed your plane. You met an angry man there at the airport. Then what happened?
Well, after that, and to make it as short as possible, the next day I came back and discovered 4 mechanics and an FAA inspector examining the airplane, and the chief mechanic ran up to me and he said, "You ain't gonna believe what's happened to your airplane." And long story short, the drive belt for the power charging system had just simply dropped to the bottom of the cowl, which was utterly impossible because it ran between two pulleys which were tightly tensioned. The belt looked like a brand new belt. It was lying in the bottom of the cowl. They said there's no way this belt could have come off of there. If it had, it would have been shredded or marked up or cut, but it was brand new. The airplane only had about 10 hours on it, and they were unable to determine how this had happened.
So this was some kind of miracle.
It looked like a
basically.
miracle. Yeah, they all agreed, this is a miracle. Well, I didn't say a word about what had happened. And they put the airplane back together again, checked it all out. I flew back to the home office in Wichita, Kansas, and that was the end of the story. But it caused me to ask questions, Bob, a lot of questions. Was this a good encounter, or was it an evil encounter? Was this an angel, or was it a demon? Was I taken through time somehow, or was my perspective altered? Was this a rescue effort? Had my airplane developed problems that needed some sort of intervention? I don't
think
know.
It's pretty obvious. It was obvious to me from the first time you told me the story, even though you weren't saved at the time. I mean, we have a God who knows the future. And he knew there was going to come a time where you were going to accept Jesus as your Savior. And you were going to alter your pathway in life from a corporate executive with an airline company to the host of prophecy in the news one day. So I think it was an angelic presence that protected you.
Along with two or three other very significant events in my life, it literally changed the course of my life, because I had an aviation career all mapped out. But what did I become? I became a Bible student, a Bible scholar, and I began to write on biblical subjects to this very day. And Bob, I view events in the Bible as very, very real. They are not mystical. They're not some spiritual hocus pocus. They are real events that happen to real people. Just like when Ezekiel had a sighting, and it was certainly to me a sighting. The chariot of the cherubim carrying the Lord God came and visited Ezekiel. And I don't think that was some mystical spirit vision. I think that was a real flying vehicle that came and landed beside him.
Well, I think you're right. In fact, when we got back from Branson late last night, I checked our emails, and here's an email we get from a gentleman regarding your time travelers of the Bible book. And he says, proposing that the Bible characters time traveled is preposterous. Some of them, like Enoch, were taken into the dimension we often call the spirit realm. In that dimension, there's no such thing as time, so therefore they existed outside of time and were not subject to its physical constraints. Being shown the future from that perspective is not time travel. I know because the Supreme Creator, I Am, showed me the future using a similar method. As for still being a believer in the false Saul, well, it just reveals where you are and the understanding of truth. So what he's saying is that time travel doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That these Old Testament prophets, they just had visions, and they
Right.
didn't really see anything. They were just given a vision.
Yeah, and what he means when he says vision is some kind of a spiritual, maybe peering through a cloud and seeing a picture, or seeing a picture in your mind. And so he has the perspective that you don't really experience something in real flesh and blood terms, but rather it's kind of an image in your own mind. I do not believe that at all. I believe that the characters in the Bible had direct experience with this world and the other side.
Well, the one good thing about your knowledge is you understand Hebrew. And a lot of people don't understand Hebrew, and you can't really understand the Bible until you can look at those words at a deeper level. You've written in your Time Travelers book, I'm going to read this because I think it's really kind of an answer to this email. It says, in the years since this amazing event surrounding Ezekiel, saints and sages have wondered exactly what Ezekiel saw. Some have said he experienced a dream or a vision, perceived in some sort of altered half-waking state. Here, they say, was the vision of a flaming chariot. It may have seemed to come close to Ezekiel, but those who hold this view cling to the idea that the whole event was one of perception rather than physical reality. So you're actually addressing exactly what he says here. And then you go into the Hebrew explanation of the words that are used in these patches in Ezekiel. And it says, however, Ezekiel carefully notes that the heavens were opened.
Yes.
The word heavens in Hebrew is, and I'm not sure I can pronounce
Yes,
it.
Shemayim.
Shemayan, which is the ordinary word for the sky. In other words, Ezekiel says the sky was opened. And as we see, this suggests he experienced a visitation from another dimension.
And as a matter of fact, from his perspective, he describes a fiery wheel that came through that opening, and it flew over toward him, and it landed on the ground in front of him, and it actually is described as having planted its feet on the ground. So to me, this is an experience, not some pie in the sky mystical cloudy vision of some sort.
Well, the Bible describes this as the throne of the Lord.
Absolutely.
I mean, the stories in the Old Testament, a lot of people think the Old Testament is boring, but the stories in the Old Testament are just, they boggle the imagination.
And Bob, David and Samuel both describe what they call the chariot of the cherubim. And they say, David in Psalm 68 talks about God travels on the backs of the cherubim. In other words, this chariot of the cherubim is called the Merkava Moftim. This chariot of wonders carries God from one place to another. And you say, well, why does God need a chariot? I don't know whether it's a matter of him needing a chariot. I think he just wants a chariot. It's what he prefers. And Bob, that's just all I can tell you. But this Merkava Moftim, this chariot of wonders, a model of that was built and put in Solomon's temple. Very few people have noticed that in Scripture.
That's interesting.
It was a real vehicle. And the cherubs occur both in the Old Testament and the New. It's a huge story, and we have touched upon it in this issue of Prophecy in the News, by the way. It's called, What Does the Bible Say About UFOs? And my experience is written here, Bob, but also a study in modern UFO apparitions, contacts, appearances, behaviors, and the like. And so I think that if you're interested in those subjects, you'll be interested in the August 2011 Prophecy in the News.
And there are some things in that magazine that are a little terrifying. I mean, to the average person who's watching this program today, we're talking about some spooky things. Some people are scared of UFOs. They're scared of, the unknown. And yet you've had an experience that you've shared with us today. And I have to add that we've covered today in about 20 minutes.
Oh.
You preached a message at Tom Horn's Prophecy Conference that had to be close to an hour, and you incorporated your personal story and the rest of this whole UFO conundrum so people can understand it. And when those DVDs or audio tapes of Tom's conference come out, you are going to want to hear Gary's message.
Absolutely. And now I'm out in the open. You can read about it in the August 2011 Prophecy in the News magazine. Gary Stearman wishing you a great day in the Lord and reminding you to keep looking up.